Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new, welcome back if you are not. I am EDJ, and I'm continuing with Historia Civilis' Julius Caesar series. So last time we covered the Battle of Sabis, whatever. Point is we covered the battle, and now I'm assuming he's going to continue on with more, of Caesar's exploits in Gaul. And yeah, I don't really have much else to add from that. I'm kind of just wanting to get right into it. I have a lot of energy today, and I'm really excited just to learn more about Julius Caesar from one of the best channels in regards to history. So yes, as always, the link is always down in the description down below. I love giving credit to the original creators, and with that said, let's just get right into it. Let's watch Caesar in Gaul making waves.
Over the winter of 57 and 56 BCE, Caesar had a decision to make. He was almost halfway through his 5-year term as the governor of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum. If he had any post-governorship ambitions, he had to start making plans now. He could go back to the Senate and assume his place as a leader in the reform faction, but that wasn't nearly as exciting as being at the head of an army. Plus, throughout Caesar's life, we get hints that he didn't love the Senate. Remember, during his year as consul, he did everything in his power to cut the Senate out of the legislative process. He could run for consul again, but legally there had to be a 10-year gap between consulships, and the Senate wasn't likely to grant an exemption in his case. That put his next eligibility at 49 BCE at the earliest. Caesar sent for his triumvirs, his not-so-secret political allies, Pompey and Crassus. The three men met in a town called Lucca in Cisalpine Gaul. This meeting, which is known to history as the Lucca Conference, has become the stuff of legend. Later writers would claim that hundreds of senators accompanied Pompey and Crassus on this pilgrimage, but this is probably a later invention. When the three men met, Caesar had a proposal waiting for them. First, he wanted Pompey and Crassus to both run for consul. It was winter now, elections were usually held in the late summer, and if they were successful, they would assume office the following January. Second, once they were in office, Caesar wanted them to put forward legislation extending his term as governor. He was midway through a 5-year term now, and he wanted another 5 years added onto that. At the end of 10 years as governor, he would be eligible for another term as consul. Third, he wanted Pompey and Crassus to secure for themselves, with the support of Caesar's allies back in Rome, powerful governorships of their own. They agreed that Pompey would get both of the Spanish provinces, and Crassus would get the prestigious province of Syria. With all three triumvirs in charge of powerful provinces, they would each be able to focus on their own affairs and stay out of each other's hair. See, there were rumors circulating at the time that Crassus was secretly offering financial support to Clodius back in Rome.
Oh no.
On paper, Clodius was an ally of Caesar's, but in reality, the man was out of control.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned before, in several videos, that Clodius, him and Pompey were kind of at odds because of the guy he exiled. I'm sorry, guys. Between Cato and, who's the other guy? Wait. Yeah, so it's Cicero. I don't know why, guys. I apologize, but every time he mentions Cicero and Cato, my head, like, I don't know why. In my head, I'm like, which one's which? Like, I know that sounds probably dumb to a lot of people, but I don't know why just those two in particular, I can't, like, sometimes I think they're the same person, and sometimes I think I attribute some things. I was about to say he exiled Cato, but no, it was Cicero he exiled. Like, I'm just like, I don't know why. Every time he mentions Cicero or Cato, I'm like, which one's which? And like I said, I just attribute the wrong things that happened to them to the other. Like, ugh. Oh boy, this is gonna be rough. At least when we get to Cicero and Cato, I'm gonna be like, who's who? Who did what now? Who got exiled? Oh man. The point is, Clodius exiled Cicero, who was tied with Pompey, but here Crassus is funding Clodius. Well, I think he said it was a rumor, but either way, and then Clodius, as we covered in his year, seemed to be pretty okay with Caesar, so I'm like, I thought for a bit like Clodius was gonna be a big contributor to like the first triumvirate falling apart. So I don't know, because it just seems like he's in the middle of all this, and he's kind of like tied with some and not tied with others. You know what I mean?
Remember, Clodius had indirectly come into conflict with Pompey over the issue of Cicero's banishment. If this rumor was true and Crassus was financing this conflict, it means that the triumvirate was beginning to crumble. The three men agreed to this plan, and Pompey and Crassus returned home. The triumvirate wasn't just held together by political necessity, but also by a bunch of small personal connections.
Yeah, we covered in the Kings and Generals coverage of Julius Caesar. Oh, my golden satch keeps like hanging down. But yeah, like Pompey was married to Julius Caesar's daughter, so you know there were connections there. I guess if there's any more, he'll explain it. But yeah, there was personal connections there, so that's the most famous one I know. I guess we'll find out if there's any more.
For instance, Crassus's son, Publius Crassus, was serving under Caesar in Gaul. Publius was probably in his late 20s, and too young for a command. But after the conference of Luca, Caesar began to ignore convention and unofficially put him in charge of a legion anyway. This was probably done as a favor to old man Crassus. For the coming year, Caesar sent the young Crassus and his one legion deep into northwestern Gaul to secure some tacit support from the tribes in the region, with a non-violent show of force. He also sent another legion under the command of a legate named Galba to the Alps. By the way, this Galba's son's son's son would be a future Roman emperor. Galba's job was to set up permanent outposts, which would protect travelers from the Gauls living in the mountains. As it was now, traveling through the Alps was extremely dangerous, especially for traders. If Caesar was planning on being in Gaul for another 7+ years, he wanted to make it as easy as possible for goods to get in and out of Italy. While constructing one of these mountain outposts, Galba's legion was attacked by the native Gauls, and for a time they were completely surrounded. But Galba kept his cool and broke out in a surprise attack, which won him the day. With one legion busy establishing a safe route through the Alps, and another legion making peace with tribes in northwestern Gaul, Caesar in his commentaries says that Gaul was reduced to a state of tranquility. This marks a bit of a turning point in Rome's relationship with Gaul. Caesar was no longer simply reacting to events. He was behaving as if Rome was there to stay, permanently. But Gaul's tranquility couldn't last forever. In northwestern Gaul, the young Crassus had established diplomatic relations with many of the tribes in the region, and accepted hostages from them as a sign of good faith. The hostages weren't kept in cages or anything, they just lived with the Romans, and were used as collateral if anything weird happened. This was normal practice in the ancient world, especially when a powerful state bumped up against a weak one. Some of these hostages were from a tribe called the Veneti. The young Crassus later sent diplomats to the Veneti to negotiate the purchase of some grain. When they arrived, the Veneti arrested the diplomats, and took them as hostages of their own. Who knows why they did this? They may have seen it as a fair exchange for the hostages taken by Rome. They may have been annoyed with the Romans for showing up and acting like they owned the place. It could have been a simple misunderstanding.
That's an interesting thought. Almost a bit of both, right? Like, at least that's what I'm thinking, right? Definitely, it must have worried the Gauls that the Romans were there, certainly, and that they showed no signs to leaving, you know, and yeah, if they took hostages, I guess the idea of we can have hostages, because I don't think they're completely at the point where they're like, well, we're just under Rome now. I think there is still some independence in the Gallic region, so it would make sense that they don't view themselves completely under Rome's subjugation. So yeah, I could see a bit of both. Maybe a bit of both. Maybe they're just dumb. Sometimes in history, you'll find that's kind of just the answer. I joke.
Either way, I think it's pretty clear that this was a minor diplomatic incident. But when Caesar got word of this, he chose to interpret the act as a formal declaration of war and a full-blown Gallic uprising. He immediately ordered a fleet of ships built on a river that led to the Atlantic Ocean and mobilized his entire army. He sent a message to the young Crassus, telling him to move south and continue establishing contact with the tribes there. With that done, he ordered 3 fresh legions to northwestern Gaul to stop any neighboring tribes from aligning themselves with the Veneti. Then he instructed Labienus to go with 1 legion to the newly pacified Belgae territory, just in case they took this opportunity to try something. This left Caesar with 3 legions for himself. He told his river fleet to start moving toward the Atlantic Ocean whenever they were ready and marched off. He would deal with the Veneti personally.
Oh boy.
Did you know Cheez-It made extra
Got
toasty?
started.
The Veneti specialized in...
I hate YouTube ads, but I'm way too cheap to buy, like, YouTube Premium. So, I'm kind of stuck in this, like, little trap, huh? Oh boy.
sea trade. So when they heard that there was a bunch of angry Romans coming their way, their first instinct was to load everybody onto their giant sailing.
Yeah, we covered this with the kings and generals. You know, Par when he covered this, where for a while it's like they're just not even fighting, they just go onto sea, and like every time Caesar approaches, they just hang out in the sea until Caesar just builds a new fleet and just completely captures them. Oh man. Typical Romans, right? Like, oh, we don't have naval superiority? That's fine, we'll just build a fleet right now, and they just do, and they're better at it than people who have sea experience. That's the funniest thing. That's like the First Punic War is like amazing because it showcased like just the complete adaptability of the Romans. You know, it's just like, it's amazing. The Romans could literally show up in your turf and be better at you than what you specialize in, which is just hilarious. Like, no wonder they became like literally the masters of the world at one point. Like, you know, with adaptability like that, heck yeah.
Ships and get out of there. They watched from just offshore as Caesar came across their abandoned villages and systematically burned them to the ground. What the Veneti didn't expect was for a Roman fleet to appear seemingly out of nowhere. Roman ships were tiny things with oars, designed for going back and forth across the Mediterranean, while the Veneti ships were these monsters with giant sails, designed for long-distance travel in the Atlantic Ocean. The Roman ships attacked, but they quickly discovered that the Veneti ships were too sturdy to ram and too tall to board normally. But they were able to figure out that they could pull up alongside them and pull down the Veneti rigging with big hooks on poles, preventing them from sailing away. After that, it was only a matter of time before the Romans figured out how to climb onto the Veneti ships. Caesar's army watched from the shore as the Romans destroyed the Veneti fleet.
Oh wow.
The surviving Veneti surrendered to Caesar unconditionally. He had...
Oh dang, that was explained differently. Yeah, I really like looking at these two channels, these Julius Caesar channels at the same time. Because yeah, they explain it very differently, but that's a cool perspective. And again, it's been a while. It's been a few days since I watched the Kings and Generals one, but yeah, I could have sworn it was Caesar just made him. Well, I probably got it. That's probably the problem with watching these two series at the same time. I kind of forget stuff. But either way, point is, Caesar won, and that's the most important point to remember.
Had their entire ruling council put to death, and everybody else he sold into slavery. This was an...
Yeah, Julius Caesar is a bit brutal. I will admit, like, granted, like I said, I don't have a negative opinion of him. I don't have a positive one either. I feel neutral for the most part. Like, unlike a Napoleon, where I was definitely, oh yeah, Napoleon rocks. I admire Julius Caesar's, like, you know, tactical and strategic skill, but that's about as far as I go. Yeah, the way it's explained here makes it really seem like, sure, yeah, that was a diplomatic incident, for sure, taking those Roman diplomats. Not trying to downplay that at all. But yeah, Caesar like just went up, completely massacred their leadership, destroyed their ships. They're just like, man, like really harsh, you know? And yeah, that's kind of the thing about Julius Caesar. He was a very brutal man. Like, a very brutal man. Like, that's, I feel like that's not, I feel like that's just pretty, there's a pretty well-known thing about him. And, yeah, it's just very brutal.
Unthinkably harsh punishment for something so small. This caused an uprising by some of the neighboring tribes, but these were put down by the 3 legions stationed nearby. Try to notice the subtle change that had taken place here. Caesar isn't positioning his legions as if he's a general marching through enemy territory. He's moved in. He's enforcing the peace. With only a short time left in the campaigning season, Caesar marched toward Belgae territory. There had been a small uprising there as well, which Labienus had successfully put down. The thing that still bothered Caesar was that there were 2 tribes around modern Calais that he said never formally made peace with him after he subdued the Belgae. In Caesar's mind, they were still at war.
Oh boy. Yeah, this started off with just a tribe asking for Rome's help, and then it ended up with just them completely being under Rome's authority. So, yeah, Caesar certainly took advantage of this, and we've kind of covered reasons such as wealth, obviously. You know, going to war and winning was obviously a pretty good way to make money, especially back then. You know, political clout, win popularity by being an awesome general, you know. Also, I don't have anything backing this up. I just think Julius Caesar really wanted to be remembered as a, you know, as a conqueror in a sense. Like, I don't know, it's like that famous story where it's like, oh, when Julius Caesar was like the same age as Alexander, he wept because Alexander had accomplished so much more, you know? And I don't doubt that Julius Caesar probably did admire Alexander the Great, and, you know, probably wanted to, in some way, emulate, you know, with his own conquest and great accomplishments. So, and, you know, Gaul was kind of a setting point, you know, that's not the right word, a place to showcase his skill and enact this desire. Again, I have nothing backing that up. I could be wrong, but that's kind of the impression I get from Julius Caesar. You know, I think he did, in a way, want glory. And I do believe many Romans, you know, did kind of want to leave a lasting mark in terms of military skill. It's kind of like, it was the consuls, right, that just had like a year or something. Like, I forgot which point of, which position of government, but there is one where it's like the term is like 1 year, and you kind of have, and I don't think, is it consul? I don't remember. We'll just go with consul. I could be wrong about the term, but, you know, had like a year, had to accomplish as much as they could in 1 year, you know, and force them to be real go-getters. And the Romans, you know, as I've said, I used to say this a lot in the Dovahati series, were very much a militaristic, I have trouble saying that word, militaristic society, a warlike people, as I called them. And, you know, often, yeah, going to war, they needed to win glory, you know, show their mettle, if you would. So, yeah, I don't doubt that also that part of just being Roman also plays a part in Julius Caesar. Here I'm trying to psychoanalyze it, dude. I'm not even... I could be completely wrong. Like I said, this is just me speculating, or just what I'm gauging. Like I said, I don't know the man personally, obviously. No, I don't think many of us do, but, you know, that's just what I'm assuming. Again, it could be completely wrong. If I ever see the man in the afterlife, I'll ask, hey, Julius, what was going through your head, you know? That depends if you believe in heaven or hell. and Julius Caesar's probably in hell, right? if I don't know, that depends on what you believe what the afterlife is.
This is a pretty weak excuse to march all the way across Gaul. Even if it was true, these people did literally nothing to provoke him.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, as I was mentioning earlier, the different perspective. And obviously, you know, Historia Civilis, thankfully, has been very clear about, you know, and many of you who've commented have been clear. First thing when I said I was going to cover this, watch out. He does not like Caesar. There is bias. And I'm like, alright, you know, and it's good to know on hand because obviously here, you know, from a more neutral perspective, like we've kind of seen with the kings and generals, you can almost kind of forget, look at this completely different, but through a more anti-Caesar lens, like Historia Civilis, you know, you kind of see the Gauls, a lot of them were just kind of vibing before Caesar walked in and just kind of decided Gaul's his, you know, it's Rome's, but it's really his kind of, but, and yeah, I guess that just kind of does put it in the perspective, because like I said, I mentioned, this all started because one tribe was asking for help from this other migrating group. Caesar was like, alright, I'll help, and then it escalated to this, right? Caesar basically occupying all of Gaul. It is amazing when you look at it. It's almost like you don't notice you're being conquered until it's too late, right? Like, yeah, that Caesar intends on just ruling all of you. He's not coming as a friend, he's coming as someone, as a conqueror in a way.
When Caesar arrived, these villages were abandoned as well. They must have heard what happened to the Veneti. The Romans set up their camp in a forested area, and all of a sudden, without warning, they were attacked. The Roman infantry didn't even have time to assemble, and just got into random groups, and formed a line of defense as fast as they could. They took heavy losses, but they held, and it's a small miracle that they weren't completely overrun. The Gauls fell back, and the Romans gave chase into the woods. Caesar notes that in the woods, his men suffered even heavier losses. This implies that the Romans may have been led into further ambushes, but Caesar glosses over this. In the days that followed, Caesar turned this temporary camp into a permanent one by clear-cutting the trees surrounding the camp for visibility and having additional walls built for defense. With Caesar finally satisfied that his boot was firmly on Gaul's neck, he turned his army around and marched south for the winter. He had big plans, but they wouldn't bear fruit until next year.
And another great and solid video from Historia Civilis. I'm gonna jump to Kings and Generals now. So, yeah, what can I just say? Overall, great video. I'll see you guys on Wednesday with Kings and Generals. Bye, everyone.